Good morning and welcome to another slideshow on Expressionism. Today we're going to look at Brucke, and Brucke translates as the bridge. That was the name of this group of artists. They were founded in Dresden in 1905, and they came up with the name because they believed in the future of art, and they thought that their art was going to build a bridge to the future of art. Their influences were many. Among them were Van Gogh, Gauguin, Munch, the Nobbies, who you remember were also associated with Gauguin, and the Fauves, who you've just recently studied. Who were the main members of Die Brucke? Kirchner, Schmidt-Rottluff, Haeckel, and Bleyl. Now, all four of these original members were architectural students at the Dresden Technical School, but rather than pursuing careers in architecture, they went into painting. Now, there were a number of other artists associated with Die Brucke, including Nolde, Pechstein, Van Dongen, and Müller. In 1913, the group broke up after Kirchner wrote a history of the group in which he played the only prominent role. It was basically, I am Die Brucke and Die Brucke am I. And the other members were angry with him for the way he portrayed his importance and their relative unimportance at that time. Ernst Ludwig Kirchner, German, lived until 1938. He saw Albrecht Dürer's original woodcuts, and Dürer was a German painter of the 16th century. And these woodcuts convinced him to become a painter, become an artist. And he produced prints and painted wooden sculptures in addition to his paintings. The last 20 years of his life were spent in Switzerland, and after the Nazis labeled him a degenerate artist, he committed suicide in despair. This is a Kirchner painting from 1910 that he actually went back and reworked in 1920 called Seated Girl. And I think you can definitely see some affinity with what the Fauves were doing in terms of the intense color and the arbitrary color here. But the expression on the woman's face says something entirely different. This is not something that I think you'd confuse with the Fauves. But beautiful color, great blue under her eyes, great contrast, that yellow-green of the face with the red of the lips. Fantastic painting, and I like her sleeves as well, the way he gets into that pattern there as opposed to just throwing in another solid color at that point. Now, a lot of the great expressionist paintings really have kind of a story that's underlying but really rises to the forefront when you look at the work. This is Artist and his model from 1907. Look at what's going on in this picture. You've got her in the background looking not particularly happy and dressed rather provocatively, while Kirchner is in the foreground holding his palette, his brushes, appears to be wearing nothing but a robe. That might lead you to wonder what's been going on here. Take note of the fact that he's also smoking. Okay? So you may get the idea that this is not a picture about painting, but a picture about male-female relationships. Again, great contrast of colors. Look at the blue and orange that complements through the robe. Very, very dynamic painting. Another self-portrait that Kirchner did is this self-portrait as a soldier. And you look at it, and the man has lost his hand, dressed as a soldier here. And you assume, looking at this, that it was lost during the war. You look at the background. Does that woman in the background seem to really be there, or do you think she's just something in his thoughts? I think the latter here. You know, he's thinking of her back home. Maybe he's just had his hand amputated. He's very upset about that. And his thoughts could be, what is she going to think about me when I return in this condition? And you look at her again, and while her body faces Kirchner, her head is turned away. So maybe he's concerned that she's not going to care for him anymore. Great stories behind the paintings, something, again, that you definitely didn't see with the Fauves, and another reason why I don't think you can call Fauvism French Expressionism. And this is Kirchner's painting called The Painters of Brucke, or Four Artists, from 1925. It's interesting that he painted this so much later on and included all four artists in it. It's kind of like he's almost apologizing in paint, saying, yes, you other guys were right there with me and were just as important as I was. Love the beard on the right. I think that's great fun. But great color, the way the blues are offset by the pinks in this painting. Fantastic image. Not exactly the image that I think you probably call up when you think of four artists sitting around together. You probably don't think of them as being dressed quite as well as these gentlemen are. Carl Schmidt-Rottluff, another German who lived all the way until 1976. He was influenced by Cubism and African wood sculptures. The Nazis labeled him degenerate, and he was forbidden to paint in 1941. Now, in 1967, he founded the Brucke Museum, and he gave 60 of his works to the collection. And that's so important because the Nazis raided their own museums, raided their own heritage, and disposed of much of the work, either selling it or destroying it or ridiculing it. And so Schmidt-Rottluff gave something back to his country by forming that museum and trying to undo some of the damage that had been done by the Nazis in the art world. Here are two self-portraits by Schmidt-Rottluff, and the previous slide was also another self-portrait by Schmidt-Rottluff. The one on the right is self-portrait with monocle. The one on the left is a self-portrait from 1906, another painting that I think is very much like the Fauves. But the painting with the monocle, I want you to really concentrate on. It has such a different vibe from the painting on the left. You know, you look at the monocle and the beard, and then the way his fingers are held together. You know, he may be holding a cigarette there, but you almost can hear him saying, "We have ways of making you paint." Looks like he'd make a great art professor there in that particular guise. And here's one more Schmidt-Rottluff called Pharisees from 1912. And you look at the angular treatment of all of the figures, and you can see that Schmidt-Rottluff at this point is very aware of what's going on in Paris, being created by one gentleman from France and another gentleman from Spain called the Cubists, in that he's really geometricizing all of the forms in this particular painting that has a religious undertone. Erich Heckel, another artist who treated the body as flat and angular, and he lived a long time, all the way until 1970. Now, Heckel made woodcuts in addition to his paintings, and he used a jigsaw technique that he picked up from Munch. You look at this particular image, and it is a woodcut, and what Heckel did was he drew the image on the board, then he cut it into different pieces, and he inked each of those pieces separately. So the ink was put on the black areas, it was put on the green areas, the blue areas, the yellow-orange areas. Then the entire block was reassembled, and all of the colors were printed at once, as opposed to just applying color to certain areas of the block as you go along. So that was a really great printmaking technique that Heckel worked with a great deal. And this is an Erich Heckel painting called Landscape Near Dresden from 1910. Great, great, great color. Beautiful yellow sky. Isn't it amazing how you can put down such a different color in the sky from what one typically sees, and yet still make it work and still make it seem somewhat believable? Emil Nolde, a German who lived until 1956, used garish colors and coarse forms to show the evil of pre-war Germany. Now, he discarded brushes in favor of rags that he'd smear the paint on with. And a great, great story about Nolde. Mothers would tell their children to behave, or that Nolde would smear them on a canvas. Wow, that's a great threat, isn't it? I'm going to smear you on a canvas and leave your impression there. Now look at this image. It seems to be just kind of a wild orgy sort of thing going on. A lot of dancing, a lot of nudity, not quite sure what's happening. Look at the top of the painting. What do you see up there in the very middle at the very top? You see a golden calf, and this is Dance Before the Golden Calf. And this is from 1910. What Nolde's doing here is interpreting a story from the Bible. When Moses went up on the mountain to get the 10 Commandments, they tired of waiting for him, and they fashioned their god of gold, this golden calf, and they were dancing and celebrating in front of this golden calf when he came down from the mountain. And so here's a great biblical story that Nolde paints. Now it's a little ironic that Nolde does these great biblical interpretations, because he too was a member of the Nazi Party. Yet that didn't help him out. He was forbidden to paint by the Nazis as well and labeled a degenerate, just like many of the other artists from this group. Here's Nolde's Last Supper from 1909. I remember showing this in the classroom a number of years ago and asking how many people think of Christ as a redhead. And at the very moment I said that, the lights went off in the room. And not only did they go off in the room, they went off in the building, they went off all over campus. Now, apparently somebody had struck a power line somewhere, but I'm not quite sure about that one. How do you find Judas in this picture? There's one thing that makes him stand out. He's the only person with a beard. You see him to the right of Christ's head. And he's the only person looking away. Okay, so Nolde is working with that theme and trying to tell a story at the same time. This is Christ Among the Children from 1910. Beautiful color throughout this painting that's located in the Museum of Modern Art in New York. You've got yellows, reds, blues, almost a primary or a triad color scheme. I love the faces of the disciples off to the left that are looking off and in a way almost not paying attention to what's going on with Christ. I think that's a great contrast to the celebratory mood that this painting certainly evokes. This is a woodcut by Nolde called The Prophet from 1912. What's cool about the members of Brucke and the other expressionist artists, when they set out to make a print, when they set out to make a woodcut, they wouldn't draw on the board and then go in and carefully cut it out. They would use their V-shaped gouges and knives and just hack away at the board and draw with knives, as opposed to drawing with a pencil and then trying to carefully cut out around the outlines that they had put down. And I think this gives an immediacy and a real spontaneity to their prints, which were in a very difficult medium to carve into wood and then cover this with ink and then take an impression, almost like they're making stamps, but they're doing it with wood blocks. Great emotion also comes forward in this print. This is Ripe Sunflowers from 1932. That's another theme that Nolde liked to work with, was flowers. Now this is done in oils, but I want to contrast that to the next image, which is another image of flowers that's called Oriental Poppies from the 1930s. And this is done in watercolor. Now, when Nolde was forbidden to paint by the Nazis, he couldn't risk painting with oils for fear that his neighbors would turn him in. They'd smell the paint, they'd smell the turpentine. And so what Nolde did is he turned to watercolor, and he did these small watercolor studies of flowers, and he called these his unpainted pictures. Now, he would go and plead with the Nazis to allow him to continue to paint and say, look, I'm a member of your party, I believe in your cause, blah, 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 blah. And still they would not allow him to paint. He was a degenerate artist. He did not follow the rules that the Nazis set down in terms of what made a good painting or sculpture. And basically that idea was something very realistic and very full of propaganda. Hitler, a frustrated artist, really took it out on the modern artists who had achieved a great deal of success even during their lifetimes. Kees van Dongen, I love his name. A Dutch painter who lived until 1968. Early on, his work was impressionistic in nature. He was a member of the Fauves, joined them in 1906, right in the middle of their movement. He exhibited with Brucke in 1908, and he's primarily known for his nudes and female portraits. I think this is a great one here. Love those eyes. I mean, they're certainly exaggerated beyond what you'd ever see in Fauvism. And this is a painting by Van Dongen called The Blue Dress. The Blue Dress. I love the attitude of the woman. You know, she's got those great greens in her face, but look at the way her head is tipped up. You know, it's a come hither look, but it's kind of like, I'm amused by your attempts to attract me. Beautiful painting, great contrast of the red, the blue, the color in the flesh with those greens that contrast so magnificently with the reds. Great complementary contrast, as we've seen many times before. Otto Müller, German, lived until 1930. He was influenced by Egyptian fresco paintings, and he mimicked the muted colors of those paintings in his elegant work. You can almost argue that his figures are awkward and graceful at the same time. This is Müller's Lovers from 1919. I think it's a very intimate piece, very beautiful, almost in a way more erotic because the figures are partially clothed than some of the nudes that we've looked at previously. But you see the angles and the jarring edges that he puts in there, yet at the same time there is this gracefulness, this intimacy to the painting. So an interesting contrast of elements in Otto Müller's work. Max Pechstein is our last artist to look at in Die Brucke, a German who lived until 1955. He was an art professor in Berlin until the Nazis removed him from his post, and again, another artist that was forbidden to paint. The Nazis went around and they said you can't paint. They said you can't teach. They removed gallery directors and museum directors from their jobs. They just basically laid waste to their entire cultural history. After World War II, Pechstein was reinstated, and he did watercolors in addition to other media like his oil paintings. And this is a Pechstein painting called Sonnenuntergang. I think that must be something like a sunset. Magnificent colors. A little more angular, a little more jarring forms than you might find in a fauve landscape, but certainly exploring some of the same ideas in this painting from 1921, many years after the Fauves. But a beautiful piece to cap our look at Die Brucke with nonetheless.